As you can see, I'm at the dyno. This is where I've also spent most of my last weekend. As you might remember, the engine was running relatively well right away in the last episode. But then I've put it on the dyno and wanted to see how much performance the scooter actually has and how it performs in the specific sections. But then, on the dyno, it was basically not running at all anymore. So I changed everything on the carburetor, tried different jets and nozzles, changed the fuel needle valve seat, changed basically everything. Same thing with the ignition and the petrol pump. I tried various strengths of gasoline pressure, everything I could think of. But it always stayed the same. It would start a test run, and at about 5000 RPM the engine would just die altogether. So the engine started very briefly and then went out immediately. At some point I was just at a loss and didn't know what else it could be anymore. So in the end I just fitted another carburetor, and since then it's been running like a charm. So if any of you has a tip on how to get a PHSB carburetor running, I'd appreciate that a lot. It was my third attempt now, and they all were horrible. I know that PHSB carburetors are great carburetors for racing, but apparently just not for me. I just couldn't do it. Now I have installed a VHSC carburetor again. That one ran straight away, and the other one has cost me 2 whole days. What I want to do today are various tests. So far I have only made sure that it runs properly and not adjusted anything. For that, I was waiting for Robert and that we can film this together. One more thing. Last weekend, which was the weekend of Pentecost, I was at Lake Constance and got a new cylinder cowling from Vollgas Motorroller. And with that, I want to start now. After that, I'll start the engine to do a first run and take a closer look at the performance and how the basic settings of the ignition and the carburetor work out. My current settings are, most importantly, a 215 main jet and 17 degrees pre-ignition. That's my starting point, and now we'll see what happens. I've done 4 runs now, one after the other. That helps to see how the engine behaves, or how it behaves thermally when it gets warmer and warmer. Now you can see it quite well on the monitor. The black one is the first run, the red one is the last run. So the performance has increased from run to run over 4 runs. That's a very good sign, because that means the engine is not instantly overheating, or that it actually doesn't overheat at all. It now has 42.3 horsepower and 46.6 Newton-meter at the end. I think for the box exhaust setup the performance is okay, but not quite where I want to be. The torque is actually almost too high, to be honest. I would rather have 41 or 42 Newton meter, so that the scooter runs nice and smooth. So I'd rather have a little less torque. But now I'll start with adjusting the ignition and the carburetor and see what happens and how the scooter reacts. So far I have a 215 main jet installed. I'd like to go to 220 now to see what happens. Set this to a 220 main jet. The most important thing, I have an affogato here. That's espresso with ice cream. And with that, everything goes a little bit better already. Alright, let's put the carburetor back on and have a look how it runs now. So let's take a look how the performance has changed. The run with the 220 main jet is the blue one, and the one with the 215 main jet is the red one. At first glance it looks like it doesn't really matter. Only back here in the over-ref section, the thick main jet is a little bit better, but that's basically a section that no one really cares about. Green and black are the thicker main jet, and those are better than red and blue in this section respectively. So if two jets are the same, I always take the thicker one. But before I continue to make adjustments to the main jet, I will do some adjustments to the ignition to find out what that does to our performance curve.
Was uns das dann so sagt.
The ignition has a basic setting of 17 degrees pre-ignition, but since the engine comes relatively early, I'll try to see if a slightly earlier ignition runs better. I have turned the ignition 2 degrees earlier now. Let's see what that does to the performance. I'll let the engine cool down very briefly after each run, just a minute or something, so that I always have about the same thermal conditions when I measure again. Now the ignition was set 2 degrees earlier, and again the noticeable difference is actually quite marginal. You can see that it has a little more torque, but the performance has stayed almost exactly the same. None of that is really exhilarating or interesting now. You can do that, but you don't have to. I'll tweak the ignition a little more, even though I don't have a clear favorite so far. I would probably take the later ignition, because the torque is actually too high for me already. It's like a lot of torque. The first setting today was looking nicer. That's a setting that is relatively safe, so I'll go back to the 17 degrees, simply because it's better on the engine for the tests to come. Because what I plan to do now is to test different exhaust systems. Because this testing is also about an exhaust layout, which will soon be available to buy in our store. So I'll do a couple of exhaust system tests now before I do the final adjustments to the carburetor and the ignition. I'm a little disappointed that the changes are so small and I can't see a clear tendency yet, but I still haven't done that much, so it's not that bad. But I'm still a little surprised how small the changes actually are. Okay, now we have the first prototype exhaust installed that I want to test. I've gone for a safe setting with 17 degrees pre-ignition and at 220 main jet, because my main concern is the comparison of the individual exhaust characteristics. So I'm going to take a look now how the first prototype exhaust runs. For the fact that this was stuck together and not installed permanently, the performance is pretty good. This exhaust has 48 horsepower and 52 Nm, and the performance also increased with each measurement. So even if the performance remained the same in the end, the band still has improved. But what you can see here as well is that the rear part is also missing. This seems to be a little problem with the engine. It rises early, peaks, and then falls off. It is a similar phenomenon that I had with the box exhaust already. And to be honest, I wasn't entirely satisfied with that either, because back there the exhaust should actually still do a little something. But you can say that the exhaust already has a pretty good performance so far. 51 Nm is probably impossible to drive, but for some reason the engine comes very early. I'll have to have another look at that again and why that is, because I prefer to have a little more revs and the whole thing to run a little more harmonious. That would be more fun for me to ride, but I have to dig a little deeper into this and see what I can find. But that was interesting nonetheless. Now, on to the next exhaust. Alright, the next exhaust is installed. I had to improvise a little with this one and I hope that it lasts during the runs, but now we can test how it is compared to the previous one. At first I thought it wasn't a big difference, but now I have to take a closer look. The second exhaust that has been made ready for assembly is missing quite some power. At 8,400 RPMs, it's missing about 6 HP for example, and it's also missing some performance in the pre-resonance section. Basically it's doing everything a little worse than the straight exhaust. It still has a very high torque, but the engine is still missing something back here and the exhaust is generally a step backwards compared to the straight one. It is supposed to be the same exhaust, but it has clearly lost quite a lot of performance due to the bending. You can see that here around 8,400 RPM there is just much less power everywhere. But somehow the engine generally has some resistance against top-notch performance above 7,000 RPM. What exactly is wrong here I still have to find out, but for now I have a good first impression. Okay, now I will test two more exhaust systems that like revs even more. I'm not expecting anything good, but I'll try it anyway. Alright, the exhaust is installed. This one is similar to the one that is installed in our SIP Sprinter, which has currently 72 horsepower. I don't think it will fit very well to this engine, because this is a plug-and-play BFA motor, just like it's meant to be. And the engine in our SIP Sprinter is an engine that I tuned, so I'm afraid that the standard BFA motor is not really getting along that well with the higher revs just yet. But we'll just test it and then we know more. Okay, what should I say? It actually doesn't look too bad after all. 54 horsepower and the performance still increased with every run. You can see that I always turned off earlier though. He turned up nicely and lays around 8.6, but he's able to turn 11 or more. But this exhaust shows as well, something is missing back there. It should be peaking about 1000 revs later, but the back part of the curve here is just missing somehow. Although that's not that bad now, because the performance is sufficient for the time being. The scooter has 24 horsepower before it goes into resonance. My previous touring scooter, a very nice Malossi, which runs very harmoniously, gets up the mountains well, has a total of 23 horsepower. And this one now has 24 horsepower before resonance. It's hard to judge on this curve, but it's still more than a good touring scooter has. And then it starts to be fun. And 54 horsepower is actually quite a lot. But the torque seems to be generally really high with this engine. This one now has 45 Newton meter again. That's actually quite decent. After this result, I of course want to test the last exhaust as well. Do you still feel like it, Robert? Of course, always. Can't wait, can you? No. What's next? Another straight tube, more noise, and then somehow strange lines?
Und danach irgendwie komische Linien.
We'll do that now. This one wasn't quite as good as the last exhaust, but well, I said previously that my guess would be 52 horsepower, so let's see what it actually did. 52 horsepower. At least I could predict it. But I'll compare it again against the previous exhaust. You can see that it's actually not much worse. It has 2 HP less now, but on the other hand, it also has 2 Newton meter more. And what the other exhaust does at the back, this one is doing at the front. It is really nice and straight up here too. So this one is actually the better exhaust, for this engine at least. If you test the engine now in a higher expansion stage, or assemble the exhaust systems to a higher expansion stage, then the blue exhaust, which had 54 horsepower earlier, would clearly be even stronger compared to this exhaust, of course. But very nice result, and because it's so much fun right now, let's just do one more. The original BFA exhaust. On request of Robert, we'll have one more round of raw noise. You can't wait for it, can you? You have to know. Behind the camera is Robert, who just joined us recently. A genius in his field of work, of course. But until recently he was planting trees in Canada. And because of that, this is exactly the right thing for him. To stand in this little box with abnormal volume and the smell of gasoline, and to look at weird lines on the monitor and hear me bragging about how cool it is that this exhaust made 0.2 horsepower more than the one before. But he's still smiling, so we can still try another exhaust. Well, I didn't expect this to happen, to be honest. Seems like we have a new strongest exhaust of the day, and that's the original BFA exhaust with 54.2 horsepower. The exhaust that I had installed earlier, the one with the 54 HP, is pretty much the same like the one that we have on our 70 HP SIP Racer. That one, however, is also designed for higher engine timings. On the 70 HP Racer, that exhaust does about 4 to 5 HP more than the BFA exhaust. But here you can see why the BFA exhaust exists and what the guys that developed it had in mind. It works astonishingly well on this original engine, and you can see that that's really an out-of-the-box motor. I've just played around twice with the main jet, turned the ignition back and forth twice, and like that this engine does 54.2 HP now. But what's also interesting is the red line. That's the exhaust which had 54 HP before. This one just has 2 Nm more as well, and it runs a little bit smoother in the pre-resonance section. I admit, the comparison is a bit unfair, because it was noticeable that the carburetor is not at the right settings yet. But I guess it wasn't for either of them. And a similar exhaust to this red one with 54 HP is in the making to be available as an official SIP exhaust. As you can see, it is relatively similar to the BFA exhaust, but it gets in a little earlier, has a little more pre-resonance power, and is overall a bit more harmonious. And with that exhaust you still do way more than 50 HP straight out of the box. And the version that is about to be released as official SIP exhaust will be a little more enjoyable on the road than the red one. We've managed to play around all day on the dyno and test a lot of exhaust systems, and in the end I have to say that I'm very satisfied with the results. I mean, this is a plug-and-play engine that comes straight out of the box and is assembled how it's supposed to be. And just like that, it has over 54 HP and, depending on the exhaust, over 50 Nm. And it just ran very, very well too. So, I'm really happy with that, and now I'm going to do some fine-tuning to the exhaust that I want to drive in everyday life. But for that, I'll retreat into the loneliness of my box and say goodbye for today. Hit the bell if you like this video, and you will get notifications for all the next episodes. But, very important beforehand, subscribe to the channel and leave us a like. See you soon. Bye.